Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Russ. So I came across this post. That I don't spend a ton of time on social media or Instagram and such, but I came across this and it struck me a little bit. So I just want to discuss this post. And it's a great example of a person going through a process. They're basically describing that they had injured themselves, or a strength coach injured their shoulder, and then had sought help to get that from a physical therapist, which was great. And then that PT ended up giving them some plyo exercises, help get them back to this higher level function, which is great, totally sound, love it. But in the post, he goes in and describes that he forgot that this would be an important part of the rehab process, and that he was focusing more on stability work and not getting into the idea of doing plyos, and had forgotten that was. And then he discusses that he took some mentorship from others, and then those mentors did not push the importance of this high level progression back to return to sport, and then therefore there's some gaps in his overall outcome. So I just think it was a great kind of story about it. He speaks at the end, that it's really critical that you develop stability and strength first, and then develop your plyometric strength afterwards, and references the continuum that we use: mobility, stability, strength, and power production. And I would add performance at the end there. They actually go compete, because just producing power in one plane of motion does not mean you can compete or react to another person. So there still is another layer there. But overall, I think it's good, but it kind of got me a little bit. Well, the other mentors thought it wasn't important, so stopped doing it, even though we know that there's this kind of basis of progression and continuum. And I think that one thing that we really emphasize here that I hope we can speak to today is this idea of why. Why are you doing the things that you're doing? Why are you choosing the exercises you're choosing? What is it you hope to get out of those things? What problem are you solving with the human body and after you've done whatever your evaluation is or whatever task it is you're trying to do? And I think there's just a lot to be said there. So we have a big philosophy that there's no real bad exercises. There's no wrong exercises. There may not be the right timing. Things that can put out of place, and that can be a real big problem. But and a lot of times there's exercises that are put in place just because of history. Hey, well, we always do this. Football guys always do power cleans and squats and deadlifts, just because. Well, if that because is we want to get hypertrophy and gain muscle size and mass, then that's a great reason to do that. If it's because doing power cleans allows you to have contact with the bar and develops a little toughness of a bar hitting you in the chest and loading, and that leads to your ability to absorb contact and be in a contact sport, and that makes perfect sense to me, and I think it's great for those reasons. But to just say that we do power cleans because it's a power generating exercise, I think leaves a lot to be discussed. That, well, let's talk about that power, because that'd be for one, it's specific, that's a vertically oriented power. And if we're playing football, we're talking more of a horizontal load, and then maybe the transfer is not going to be as great as one. So I think I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about the whys of the exercise and some of these avenues that we take. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, well, just so many ways to spin that, and I think in PTs we tend to be a bit nerdy. We've read a lot of books, we've done a lot of graduate education, and we hold a lot of weight on our knowledge. And so somehow we must have this special knowledge that I have the best exercise for this. And you see this in academia, because we're obsessed with measuring muscles and saying this exercise has this. There's a lot of, and it's great information because we've learned, we've applied some facts that these muscles are turned on when we do this and this pattern. And then as a professional, we must hold this knowledge. And I think that sometimes in academia, and particularly in the physical therapy industry, we can almost get a little bit more dumb the more we know. I think of old strongmen like Sig Klein. He was known to do a bench press with 300 pounds. A bench press is a really awkward lift. You kind of hoist the weight. Imagine imagine this at 100 or 200 pounds with one arm. You hoist it on your hip, and then you turn in a really awkward way, and you pivot your body and your arms so that you thrust it up over your head. And they did this literally in the 1920s and 30s, and it required an insane amount of both movement and flexibility and strength in really awkward positions. And that was the norm. If you went to the gym into the modern 1920s and 30s and 40s, it had rings, it had a pommel horse, it had maybe a few kettlebells, and it was calisthenics. It was really a hybrid of lifting some heavy weight in awkward ways that was never off of the bench or off of a chair. It wasn't a single chair or bench in the whole place. And there was no cables or anything like that. But it's not like back in the 1920s we had the world's best athletes. The athletes were still probably quite humble in what they could do: sprint, jump, boxing. So fast forward 100 years, we have Conor McGregor's, we have Uriah Faber's, we have Usain Bolt's, we have Tom Brady's that can throw in the quarterback position for 20 years or whatever. We have these phenomenal athletes that have accomplished things. Have they done that because we've gotten a lot smarter with how we load the body? I think so. I think at the college level and professional level, there's some really, really smart people of how they load. But I think when you look in football specifically, they do a lot of Olympic lifting and powerlifting, or maybe just Olympic lifting. And when you look at other sports, they kind of poo-poo it. I know in soccer or in tennis, they kind of really, they don't want you to do these refined short range of motion movements. So I think there's a lot of bias and a lot of opinion to this space. And so what are you left with? You're left with principles, and you're left with try to ask the smartest question. What do you want out of the body and how you get it? And because if you really ask that question, rather than say, we do squats because we're in football, we do split squats because we play tennis, we do rotational exercises and overhead stability because we're at MMA, rather than kind of be glued to these rules, you have to look at the person in front of you and start with, are they hypermobile or hypomobile? Do they naturally have a lot of muscle up top, a lot of muscle down low? You have to look at what are the gifts of that person. And then how are you going to stress that person to super adapt in a way that makes them different than how they were right now? Start there, because that feels very individualistic. Whereas if you say, what sport do you play? That's pretending that the running back and the quarterback and lineman are all the same person and all adapting the same way, which we know is a whole bunch of shit.
I think that's so good. That's a big thing for me is beyond the sport that they play. If it's football, then we might know how a wide receiver might play and how a DB is and a running back and a lineman. Obviously, if you know the sport a little bit, you know there are different demands. But I think what I've gone to is with sport like basketball or sport like soccer or even tennis with an athlete is I want to know more about their style of play. So yes, you play basketball and maybe you're a guard or a forward, which nowadays is almost interchangeable positions. But it's what's your style? Are you an individual attacking player? Or do you move without the ball extensively to get open and get a shot where you can get an open look? Do you break people down in a one-on-one environment, or do you body people underneath and get more offensive rebounds and score? Because your style of play will determine the quality of movement and kind of movement that you need. So I use that a lot. It's okay, where are we going with this? And a lot of times, especially younger the athlete, they may not know what their style of play is yet, right? They might not know what they're good at or what their strengths are. But that will come with your evaluation ability and your assessment as you ask them to do more things. It should start to expose themselves to you. But this guy moves laterally extremely well. So maybe that means defensively he's really, really strong, or he has the ability to be very shifty in mid-lateral planes. And so he's going to get step back opportunities to get space in him as defender that way. So I think that's a great point, is finding out not only what does that body do in that sport for that person is really the right question to ask. I'm talking about this a lot with Uriah, which we're going to speak to now that he's retired and such as far as strategy, but the way that he's built he's built perfect for the style of sport that he plays. Yeah. And the fact that his neck is almost doesn't exist. Yeah. It's very difficult to choke him out.
Yeah. And he rotates faster than anyone on the planet because he has that rotary mechanics. He can twist and no one, he's never been if you get my back, I could care less. I'm just going to spin on a dime. You're not going to be able to get my back anymore. So you willingly just, I'll throw my back to you. Try and do something. I'm just going to spin, grab you, and then I'm inside, and I'll get you with, some arm bar or a guillotine or rear naked. And he's used the gifts that he's been given, and he's really developed there. That's what we ask of every person. You understand your body.
That's where we see that greatness in the athlete, is that they use it in a way that makes a lot of sense. And you can look at a number of people. I think LeBron James is very well. Everybody knows LeBron. He does this very well in the NBA, where he uses his body to win in a certain way. I think he can use it a lot more extensively than he does. He tries to be a little more finesse guard at times. and I think he could really score at will. But chooses not to involve his teammates more, but that's another story. But you also see other guys that are extremely flashy, like a Steph Curry guy or like a James Harden scores the same way almost every time, and still no one would stop him because of his style of play and his physique is such that you can't get there. Or a guy like Luka Doncic is interesting, where he's just so different. He's a bigger guy, not fast by any means, but he's quick and he's elusive in his own way. So his style of play is very different from like a Damian Lillard or like a Giannis or somebody like that, and yet extremely effective. So I think that's an important question as to what are we trying to get out of your body? Where are you going with it? And that's more important than, okay, you play this sport, so you should do this lift, or you even have this injury, so you should do this lift. That's what I think that's our point here. We need to get away from in our field of PT or strength conditioning, is this not just assume that like, oh, you have this problem, or oh, you have this, you should do this exercise.
Yeah, because really, the sport you're returning to is just one facet that makes them unique. The other parts are their age, their gender, their limb length, where they collect their mass. And we start gathering up all this to truly appreciate who's a person in front of us. And that's such an important starting point, rather than starting to like, oh, you have rotator cuff pathology. Well, we need to get you on a rotator cuff program. Oh, you dislocate your shoulder. We have to use shoulder plyos. Yeah, I think we focus so much on exercise, and we have to first focus on what's the problem to solve. Can't say that enough. And you don't know the problem to solve if you can't answer a simple question. When you say something to a client or patient and they ask why, if you cannot give a convincing narrative as to why we do this, you don't understand the problem. If you've ever struggled there, why should I do this exercise? And if you don't have a very thorough, perfect, slam dunk answer, then you have that answer yourself, and you're a bit lost on your own continuum.
Yeah, if you guys have had a chance to watch Russ treat live, it's really a spectacle, and I'd encourage you to like come visit us if you want to come visit and watch Russ. It's like we should sell tickets for this. Like it's incredible to watch. It's like anything you've never seen before. Yeah, some people doing like handstands in one corner, and then other people are doing something with their neck like on the ground or on a ball or something. And then you have like somebody else doing something completely normal that you'd see at every clinic you went to in the country. It's just this like, and if you went up to him and you said, Russ, why is that person doing that? He would tell you exactly why that person is doing that in that moment. And it's beautiful because it's like, okay, like maybe we have like a young girl doing handstands or something. Maybe she's a gymnast would be the obvious thought. But there's been many times where I've looked at you doing something and I'm like, that person's not a gymnast. And they're still doing handstands. How did we get here? What on earth is going on? Or like, why is this person doing cartwheels across the floor? Like, this is not something we typically see. But when you see it, there's a reason for it. And that reason is probably to graduate some sort of, like, it's a cartwheel across the floor. It's to add some sort of plyometric overhead load. Like, we look at in strength and conditioning, you might say, like, hey, let's do snatch. Snatch is great for developing overhead strength, right? Let's snatch with the bar, and it's great power production exercise, highly correlated with high performance in many, many sports. And highly correlated with speed, highly correlated with power, great exercise. It doesn't mean you have to snatch to get those things, but it's highly correlated. But the ability of a person to do a handstand for so many seconds, walk on their hands for so long, is probably equally as correlated to that person's ability to generate force and power within their own body. And you choose to use that for the right people at the right time.
That's a great concept. I love how you just talked about a snatch and then a handstand. And the snatch, it's like, for some reason, when we say to a 16-year-old, we're going to do a snatch progression, and if they've spent any time in a gym, they understand what's going to happen. Whereas when we think of a handstand, we kind of think of like, oh, so they're doing gymnastics. Like, you recognize that a snatch is far more complicated. If you took someone that didn't know anything about a barbell and then tried to develop their body to be able to handle a snatch that actually stressed their strength and power, not their nervous system, so that they learn the power. Let's get through the whole learning channel and stress it. You could probably it would take at least like 4 to 6 months to get to a capacity with that lift to actually get anything out of it. Whereas handstand, super low threat. Super low high threat, but low skill. As long as they're not going to dislocate the shoulder, and kind of await an appropriate timeline for any trauma to settle. But it's very low skill. You just use a wall, climb up to it, see if you can stabilize yourself. You can. You're turning red, but it's okay. Let's get on one hand. It feels scary. But it's low skill, which means we can actually start adapting today. I don't have to wait for 4 months to learn something. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I do the same thing with a rolling squat. So you put your feet together and you try and roll to the ground. You start from a standing position and you squat all the way down, roll on your back, and then roll up and see if you can stand up out of it by keeping your feet together. So there I work 4-inch motion squat, and then I work overhead stability, and that every 12, probably every 8-year-old, all the way to their 20s, can start adapting today, rather than having to spend a lot of energy by some specialist who thinks that they know what you need to be doing in the gym. Months before we actually get there.
Yeah, actually, months is probably an understatement on like learning some of these advanced exercises, like to do a deadlift and seriously load it so you can get the typical hypertrophy benefits. Obviously, you get neurological benefits just by teaching the position. There could be some wins there. There's a reason to do that for sure, especially if this person's going to need to be loaded for the next 6 to 10 years. They're going to need to develop the skill set of how to do a proper deadlift so they can make long-term gains, or a proper snatch for that matter. But I think that's it. I think we need to consider when teaching exercise, when selecting. Just another thought is that if you're choosing a snatch or a power clean or a deadlift, those are their own sport. Like Olympic lifting is a sport. You can win a medal for it at the Olympics. Therefore, the training of that is extensive. And having taught these lifts for the last 20 years, it's a lot of work. And it's much more than I'm biking in 4 to 6 months. I mean, you could certainly get to a point where you're doing effective work at 4 to 6 months, but you're probably looking at multiple years, especially like something complicated, a snatch, to really be able to load it and get the benefits you want. And it has to be at the right time of the person's career with the developing skeleton that's ready for it, and really have no limiting factors.
So if it's the question itself, if the snatch or power clean, I think the snatch is probably obviously more controversial than power clean. Let's just say if the power clean is the solution, what's the problem? And I say the problem often is a football athlete that is going to be in the gym for the next 8 years because they're a freshman in football. They've got the DNA and the drive to go through high school and through college. So they're going to be doing this for the next 8 years. Now it sounds to be really quite worth it to develop a very good power clean because they're going to be in the gym. That's this person. They want to collect a lot of muscle. They want to collect a lot of mass. They want to collect a lot of power, and they need to move some serious weight because that is the sport. They got to move all their bodies, so they don't mind taking their weight, jumping up 100 pounds, even if they're the fastest guy. They need to be 240, fast and powerful. But other sports, I think that's an interesting. That might not be the question to solve.
Yeah, and I think it's not just that. Not putting down the exercise, but we're big fans of using the kettlebell. We love using the kettlebell in the rehab process and in this development and strength process. But we're also hesitant on who we teach it to. So not everybody should be doing an arm bar. They still have a third position of the arm bar. Not everybody should necessarily be doing a 90 kilo get up. Now, is it a good idea if they really committed themselves, say, hey, I really want to be good at that? They're like, well, again, I still think that's a pretty safe option. If you build your way to it and you're committed to it, then good luck over the next couple of years. It's going to be a process. But if they're not committed mentally to mastering the movement of exercise, then let's not teach them an exercise that requires extensive focus. Let's teach them something that's more self-limiting, that they get the job done and they can really make quick adaptations to your point and have some fun with it. Need minimal equipment, do it anywhere, gain confidence, and as well as all the other.
I think the best phrase, I think that's become one of my favorite phrases, I think, as a therapist, is self-limiting exercise. You can think of the Nordic curl, split squat, pistol squat, all variations of a pull-up, a dip, different, even a single or single leg push-up or different handstands. They're inherently self-limiting. You try it and you can't do it, but practice all of a sudden you can. That's fun. That's interesting. If you want to, a lot of parents oh, my kids can't touch their toes. How do I get to touch their toes? And come do a cartwheel. And I bet after about 300 cartwheels, that posterior line starts to lengthen because you can't do it otherwise. It's a really hard thing to do. If you can't touch your toes, try it. It demands that flexibility. And so I think the younger you are, the more in raw development you are, you really have to ask, what's the question to solve? If you're injured, it's a different question. It's how do I restore this capsular range of motion after a shoulder dislocation like this post? If your shoulder dislocated, the tendon got traumatized and it got weak as shit because you were kind of healing for 6 weeks and not moving that much, well, then we got to re-bolster that stability and strength. And so those are pretty simple goals. Let's restore motion. Let's restore stability, strength, measured by a dynamometer. That's pretty basic. And that's the first question to solve. And then once we have something that's operational, now we have to ask more athlete questions like, do you move ballistic enough? Is your nervous system good enough at handling the force coupling and dynamic stability required at these end range movements? And are you challenging it in that way on a regular basis so that you actually adapt?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. It brings us right to this idea. I want to go a little bit of history again on physical therapy and where we've kind of progressed and such. So maybe in the 90s, when I was in high school and decided this was going to be my profession and my future, it was really about a lot of the clinics were like a hum clinic, heat ultrasound massage type of focus clinic, which was really what spurred my interest. Is that I wanted to do more exercise as a patient. I got hurt and I wanted to get back into the game and play basketball and get back as soon and as fast as I could. I'm like, what are we doing? And there should be more for me to do, which has kind of spurred my passion for how do I get back there. And then going through school and PT school and such, that became well, don't become a hum clinic, actually do something more valuable, do more valuable manual therapy, learn how to do manipulation, become a fellow of the Orthopedic Academy of Manual Therapy and become a CONT and get these amazing hands where you can, do these amazing things. And then that kind of had a peak probably in the early 2000s and then started to fall off. And then exercise became this big thing. CrossFit was coming in and really pushing the human body in some exciting ways. And a lot of therapists were anti that, but CrossFit, there's nothing wrong with CrossFit. I mean, the exercises they choose are fantastic. Nothing different than the strength stuff we've been doing for the last 50 years. So there's not like it's
Olympic lifting plus gymnastics.
Yeah, and it's really genius in a lot of things. The only thing that I didn't love about the model would be the time element.
Nobody AMRAP.
Yeah, that you would take something and say okay, let's take a movement that's very high skill demand, like a snatch, or a power explosive that's demanding, and then see how many you can do in a very limited period of time, or a long period of time.
Which became sport.
Which became its own sport. And then the people that did it well did it really, really well, and they were fine. But those who were hoping to get a workout in after work and try to compete with those folks, I think saw some challenges with their skeleton with that type of situation. But overall, I think it was a really positive thing. And then in the therapy field at that time, or in the sports medicine field, biomechanics became this massive thing. So we have Greg Cook on the functional movement screen, which was awesome, something I learned from the beginning, used the whole time as a good tool. And then you got into 3D motion capture. I think Tiger Woods was coming up at this time and was the most dominant athlete we'd seen in that sport ever. And he was strong. It was fit,
powerful, rotating well.
Yeah, he was doing amazing.
He's an athlete.
He was insane. And it was the best on the planet. No one could debate that. It was it took kind of the golf industry by storm. So then there was development of Tyler Performance Institute, TPI, and they started looking at 3D motion capture and what do these guys do that are different and special. And that produced some phenomenal data of how we perform better. Some really interesting data as well, but some really phenomenal stuff. And then 3D motion capture became the thing. Everyone should be looking at movement and measuring movement and motion capture. But it was very difficult to get that from the lab to a clinical environment. So some of the elite teams and pro sports were buying 3D motion capture systems, but I would argue probably way too late in the athlete's life, right?
Yeah.
If you're getting motion capture on somebody who's 22 and already made it to the big leagues, guess what? They already made it to the big leagues, so you're not going to change their motion now.
Yeah.
You need to do that at 14.
Yeah.
And so no one working at 14-year-olds can afford him. So it kind of came and wins, and it's still out there. It's still a big deal, but it's not what it was. And we've learned a lot through that time that science of perfect movement isn't really definitive performance. There may be ideal movement, and there's certain patterns that are certainly more ideal than others, for sure. But I find a good example, I think Patrick Mahomes is a great example right now for me, the success that he's had in his first 5 seasons. And if you just look at him as an athlete, and he's phenomenal at what he does. But if you look at like the angles and the mechanics in which he does it, I think just about everybody can agree that it's not maybe what we would consider and thought to be optimal. But he's extremely elusive and extremely smart and extremely quick, fast. All of these things that make him so special and so dominant in that space. You know, I mean, maybe the most dominant I've ever seen. 4 Super Bowls in 5 years, and it's just insane. But now we're seeing this movement as technology has kind of caught up that like maybe it's not about how you do the movement, but it's about how much force you generate when doing the movement. So if we're going to say jumping's the skill, well, how much force can you produce using a force plate system to measure that now and see what kind of amplitude you're getting, what kind of newtons you're generating. I think we've determined that like rate of force production is a difficult measure to kind of justify and use, but we thought it would be really important. But it's hard. There's so much variability. It's hard to like stabilize at the moment. But we see this movement now towards using dynamometers, using force plates, and using these tools. And then it's now about the measurement. We don't. The extreme would be we don't really care how you do it, but how much force can you generate? Is it enough or is it not enough? Which takes us back to this idea of what exercise are we choosing? What's the intent of it? You know, is it self-limiting? Or are we pushing beyond self-strength and power development? So I think it's an interesting progression of how we got to where we're at.
Yeah, you know, you can't help but go through Instagram and you know, everyone wants to be different. That's how we get likes. That's how the algorithm works. So you want to kind of showcase something different and unique. And I think many times you're trying to go against conventional wisdom, because it's common for young people to, you know, look at conventional wisdom and say, well, they got it wrong. There has to be a better answer. There has to be a more right answer. It's weird, I think, as humans, we want to keep trying to improve, but look at the stats of the Olympics. There's been tremendous improvement in the last 30, 40 years. So that you kind of really, I'm not sure how many people are really asking why. And I think from a sports medicine standpoint, I think we help people stay moving longer. I'm not so sure. It's like, oh, because we have all this excellence of knowledge of understanding how the body produces force, that's why there's better athletes. I'm kind of curious.
That's a great question. So oddly enough, I was at we had this high performance summit with USA Track and Field, and there was a presenter that presented this concept. Have we reached the peak of human performance? Looking at Olympic data or world competition, world championships, Olympic data combined, and he was showing graphs that had this bit of, you know, kind of curve where it was a high incline, a high percentage of incline, then it kind of slowed down, and then we kind of reached a little bit of a plateau. And looking at different events like the 100 meters, for example, or the high jump, or the pole vault.
Pure speed, pure power, pure strength.
Yeah, which is track, which is beautiful, right?
Yeah,
so
shot put, yeah.
Yeah, when you're working with track, there's no defense, right? So it's like you against the elements. You know, how fast can you run, how high can you jump, how far can you throw up? It's pretty much the question. Same question we ask in sports. The only difference in other sports is that you have to go against some sort of defense. You know, track, maybe you can say the environment's your defense, but nonetheless, it's the outcome is almost already anticipated because you know what the number is, unless your training cycle is pushing you beyond what your potential is, or up to a higher potential than you thought possible. But the point was that a lot of the curves were plateauing and had plateaued for a while, and then Usain Bolt came along, and then like dropped the speed number by like over 0.2 of a second, right? Which hasn't been touched yet again. Although we see multiple people approaching it and getting closer to this low speed number that we've seen previously. So you're starting to wonder, is there training advancements, or is there genetic advancements? Are we finding better athletes at their skill set to go ahead and do this? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's a very interesting question.
Well, this is, you know, on our podcast a few years ago, we had Dan John, and what I loved about Dan John is I really felt like Dan was a part of the development cycle that helped really improve throwing for track and field athletes. And what he did in the 90s and 2000s, he helped develop these athletes from low power and low speed, and he developed this system that could rotate and throw really, really well. And And I would say, I would look at him and say, he built 13-year-olds that grew into 25-year-olds. They could be the best at what they do. And I have a lot of respect for those that are more in the youth factor of development. Because to say that you train pro athletes, you've trained a system that's already been defined for 10 years. And you're just managing it. So when you're part of the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old, that's the real work, and to develop the system. And well then,
Couldn't agree more. I don't want to say it's like the last frontier, because I'm sure there'll be more. I'd be stupid if something like that. But nonetheless, I'd say that frontier of developing this youth age group from 12, 13 up to age 18 is really special. It always has been. But now with the tools that we have and the knowledge that we have, the ability to have an impact on building the right human, help them build the right tools and the right skills and the right qualities, so that as they further along their athletic development cycle, they can be ready for their next phase, and is so critical now more than ever. Because you don't have, like before, for the last, maybe before 2015 and before that, it was you go to college and you could develop an athlete in college. That was the most fun. Like when I was at Pacific and we were strength training folks, we were literally developing athletes over that 4-year period. And you see that across the board. Like kid would come in as a freshman, and maybe they'd play a little bit, but maybe not as much. And as they got stronger and mature, they'd play more and more. But now you don't get an athlete for a 4-year period in college anymore because of different things. Especially it's not the elite levels because of all the transfer portals, guys going pro early, whatever it may be. It's just you don't get those 4 years. So now those 4 years, in my mind, move down to this high school sector, where it's like, this is your time from like 12 to 18 to really develop the youth with a consistent approach. You have maybe a consistent coach in high school, or a consistent program at least, that can develop an athlete over a period of time, and choosing the right thing at the right time is just absolutely critical for that really.
Well, I think in development, I love talking about what are the developmental things that every 12-year-old should do that's really interested in athletics and sports and fitness, or just to be really physically sound and healthy, may say, like future military, the future fire. What should the 12-year-old do? What should the 14-year-old do? I am empowered as a clinician whenever I see an ankle sprain and they're 13 years old and they play soccer, I'm challenging their abdominals in some capacity. I bring their body in a certain position, might be like a wiper, might be like a back extension or a Nordic curl, and it's stuff. I have 13-year-old soccer athletes do Nordic curls when they sprain their ankle. That's because why not? Let's stress the body and it grows. That's one thing. That's a principle that we know. Let's stress and it grows. And when you stress the body, more muscles. Say you have 800 of them. If I can get 400 of them firing in a really aggressive way, do it 50 times. It's going to create a stressor. That's going to create a hormonal response. And I'm going to believe, unless proven otherwise, that the ligament's going to heal faster because of that hormonal response. And that's our job as a PT, to give them self-limiting activities that don't over-challenge the healing area, and let's work. And for young people, or even just adults that are highly motivated, I think this works really well because we're solving the problem of let's adapt and regenerate at an elite level. And then after we get through that primary healing phase, we kind of attack more of the mobility and strength right at the ankle joint.
Couldn't agree more. I had 2 stories in my head just from today. Just this morning, working with someone, I had an older lady who's previously had failed some PT with a hip pain that, whatever, doesn't matter. But the joint was fine, but she was a little bit weak through her entire hip, not just the lateral structures, but there was some lateral weakness as well. Of course, she'd been doing leg lifts and clams, and she's like, I've done so many clams, I could be sick. And I'm like, well, I'm sick just hearing that, and I wanted to give one to you. Because I despise the exercise. Not to say there's a bad exercise, but I just don't understand that one. I can't think of one reason that I would need one, but maybe I haven't been exposed to it yet. But to this point, I still can't find a reason for that one. But it's still fine, warm up and activation, whatever. So anyways, we went into the basics. So we ended up putting her in a side plank, right? And I go to the side plank, and she said, well, I haven't done this in a while. I'm like, I know, because I can tell by your strength. You haven't challenged your body in a while to actually be strong. You think you're strong because you can walk, but you're not. And you told me you wanted to ski. You told me you wanted to hike. So let's go do some stuff that is at least moving in that direction. So we get on her side, which she actually gets up there and does fairly well for 5 to 10 seconds, and then starts to struggle and goes down. So we set the self-limiting goal, like, okay, the next week I want you to build this to 30 seconds. No trouble with her shoulder, and then she did great with it, and she accepted that pretty well. And then, of course, I took her just one step further. I said, now the reality here is that if you want to ski and do things, you should be able to lift your top leg. So be in the side plank. Once you get this 30 seconds, then I want to see if you lift your top leg. And once you can do that, you don't have to do the exercise anymore. Because at that point, you'll be skiing and doing everything you want. You can be there. And I told her, I said, look, not everyone can do this. I'm not saying this is easy. However, I have never met an athlete that can't do it. So if you're asking me, how do I get back to skiing and how do I get back to doing athletic activities? Let's act like an athlete. Let's do things that are self-limiting. You can't control your own body. How the hell are you going to go out there and do it in a competitive, fast environment within a changing environment of ice and snow change and other people trying to take you out on the mountain? Like, it's a combat sport. Like, let's go. So I think that resonated well with her. And, I think that's something that we've got to think back to the why. Why are we doing what we're doing and relate it?
You solved the right question because I think a common question would be like, well, how do I help a 60-year-old with hip pain? Wrong question. How do you help a slightly aged person get back on the slopes? That's the question. Like, let's start with the right question, and then we solve it. And it bypasses the thought of like, well, she's got some degeneration in that hip. So what? Just go and skate. So what? Does degeneration make it so that you can't load it in a closed chain fashion? How the hell are we walking for 10 decades? So, but hey, we got to ask why, and what's the question to solve? And what I love is saying, well, every person skiing should be able to handle a single leg side plank. And I also start asking, like, what are some hard things that your other side can do? And this is where I think a lot of our, in our continuum, we have like, I think I counted, we have like 60 different tests in our continuum. And that's not to say there's not 61. There's probably hundreds. And all we did was just look at what are some common things that one side of the body can do that oftentimes if you have an injury, the other side can't do it. That are in the mobility bucket, in the stability bucket, in the motor control bucket, in the speed, fast, move, reaction bucket. What is naturally normal for a 60-year-old skier on the slopes? And I bet you a single leg side plank for 10 seconds is normal on her hip that doesn't hurt. And with my MMA fighters, I have them do the single arm pull-up, or not single arm, just a hang, single arm hang, and they can hold it for 10 seconds. And almost every time, on their non-problem side, they can hold it for 10 seconds. And then I say, like, well, we have to solve that problem. We have to return back that normal stability of your entire arm, not just in your grip, but also through your arm, through your armpit, and through your lateral core. And we have to solve that problem because that's your athletic norm. That's your athletic base. And so as a therapist, you have to realize there's a lot of those potentials that we have to solve too. And then we have to pick stressors that really have the best, just the best way of generally improving the system rather than focus. For instance, if we just do a gripper for a grip, that's only 8 exercises. Where if we pick up half our body weight and go for a walk, now we got 700 of them. So let's keep the program realistic and let's stress the system in ways that work, but also lead to an adaptation to solve the right problem.
Yeah, I love, like you said, self-limiting. If we can, I think the things that come from that, where it's more total body or solve that problem, is that you're also building this mental side of confidence, where now all of a sudden the client is like, man, I feel like I can move and I can do some stuff and I have control of my system. Even if you put them on a leg press and they could squat, body weight on the leg press, it still doesn't transfer the same as actually doing it live. So anyways, I think there's a collateral benefit there of doing functional stuff that's hard, and then them building the ability to do it, building that confidence and taking that out to whatever it is in life, whether it be sports or whatever else, like there's some collateral benefit there. The other one that got me this morning that still pisses me off, I have to send a few text messages here to kind of get lined up the way that we should be, is I was working with this one young man. He's a pitcher. He's a pretty pristine pitcher for his age group and does really well, but he was mismanaged 2 years ago on an elbow surgery situation, but he's doing better now, but I wish that would have been managed differently by the PT at the time. It's not part of our group, but nonetheless, just again, why we're here today is trying to make it better. But he was talking about one of his teammates who now has an MCL injury. Right, so he was a catcher and was actually hitting, and is diagnosed with an MCL issue from after swinging, went down, and right, his knee is jacked. All I know is that he's in a brace. And so I asked him, like, he's like, without him, our season's going to be compromised. I'm like, well, it's February. Like, we could have him back in a couple of weeks. It's just an MCL. I mean, we could have it's a completely ruptured thing. This is unlikely. Maybe it's not from swinging. I could see if he's playing football and got hit loudly, then maybe he's out for the season. But I was a little surprised, like, well, what's he doing? And then, of course, we have the natural answer. Well, I don't know. He's just in a brace on crutches. And I'm like, all right. What are we doing?
Yeah, the MCLs need the non-weight bearing status.
What are we doing? Like, oh my gosh! Like, okay, like we need to talk to this kid and his family, and like let's get some proper medical care in line where we can move in the right direction. You could speak on MCLs all day in your field because you guys are getting intentional MCL strains left and right in the MMA space.
Yeah, if you don't have medial knee pain, you're not trademarked.
And their return back is not this delayed, ridiculous process.
What problem are we solving? Is it an MCL problem, or do we have the ligamentous insufficiency? So if we gap that, does it open 30 degrees? Seeing that, that's a bit scary when it freshly opens to 30.
Yeah,
and it should only be 5. So let's solve that problem. And that might be
that's
involved. It's an involved. That's an involved case. That might limit the season. If it's just a little bit of, little boo-boo on the vehicle side.
It's just painful.
It's just painful then.
Yeah. Okay. And there's things we can do to stimulate the healing process and facilitate this back in a better way. And that's just what this is all about, is how do we, find the right thing for the right person in the right time. But it's frustrating to see that still happening in our community. It's like, come on, like, how do we get this young man the care that he needs? That's what motivates in this whole profession, is to be able to help people get back to what they're doing faster and better. And I hear that, oh my gosh, yet still not being referred. And
so if I were to reframe that I'm hearing there's potential of this person being way underdosed in the first 6 to 8 weeks, and then the season's gone. Right, yeah. It's completely throw it away if you're underdosed in the first 6 to 8 weeks. So can you go into the other one with the elbow at the baseball elbow injury? Yeah, how was that mismanaged?
Well, he still doesn't have extension. So he had a stress fracture. It was 2 years ago. They operated and they stabilized it with the screw and allowed it to heal, but it was never restored full extension, never given a throwing program. In that case, he was allowed to return much faster than what should have been. So the complete continuum was stepping aside, like, oh, he'll be fine. I think they had him doing throwing based activities for 1 month after surgery with the screw in there. So at that point, you haven't given the tissue any time to mature. You haven't given it any kind of stress to load it progressively so that it can progressively get stronger and then tolerate the forces of throwing. So that was a complete, let's just jump right to the final product before we establish a foundation. And then we have the other end of the case here now, where this young man's supposedly in a brace, not doing anything, 2 weeks out of his MCL, and it's like, well, we're losing ground here. We're losing muscle mass in a hurry, but we're losing range of motion. We're gaining stiffness. If we allow it to go 6 weeks to heal, which the MCL has high healing potential because of the blood flow and everything to it, I fully support that. But it doesn't need to be immobilized for 6 weeks and everything get weak in the process. Then it's going to take us 6 to 12 weeks to get that back.
So that, I think, is inherently the problem of every protocol out there. So I think younger therapists lean into protocols to make sure that they don't do the 1 and 2 extremes, because you don't want to appear like a dumbass. You don't want to underdose for a person who's highly motivated to get back at a high level. So you have a fear of underdosing. And then you have the fear of overdosing when you do too much and they get re-injured. So on one end, you actually don't help them. And on the other, you increase the risk of them getting hurt again, and they're never going to see you actually aided injury. I'm not sure where the bias is. I know when I started as PT, I definitely had more fear of, what was it? I had a fear that I was going to give them too much. So I lean into protocols to. I think it's the end. It's a good fear for you. That's probably just my nature, And now I've grown up. Now in my mid-40s, I flat out tell that to patients. I say, hey, I have a problem. I tend to give people a little too much. So you know what you're gonna do? You're gonna communicate back to me. So, rather than change, I just improve my communication.
Well, that's because you understand the body and you understand their goal, and it's like, well, this is what you need to do to get that done, and it's the safe time to do so. They just don't believe it.
Yeah. So that's where I think every young PT, let's just say if you're listening to this podcast, hopefully you're in that phase of trying to demand authority. You want to be the authority to the world. And that means you really need to aim. You need to aim in that sweet spot. And I'm not so sure how big that spot is. So between underdose, that you're not helping them succeed because you're just underdosing them and they're not going to grow. They're not going to adapt. The tissue's going to be weak because of what you're doing. And then doing too much, you push them too fast, too hard. Because you want to see athletes, you want to see the best, you want to see the best 17-year-old who's got crazy parents that are going to be watching like a hawk. And the best 25-year-old will ask you 10 questions to make sure that you know your stuff. And the professional 45-year-old will make sure that you're also treating 22-year-olds at their best. So everyone's going to demand the best. And what is there to be the best of? It's mastering that sweet spot between underdose and overdose. And the only way you can do that is asking the right question.
Yeah, 100%. Ask the right questions. Have the knowledge of what the healing process is, so you know that you can dose them to some degree. I think that one of the biggest things that we tend to miss too in our field is if you worked enough with healthy people, training them to become elite, then you know what the human potential is, which is freaking high. What the body can do, what it can tolerate, what it needs to be loaded to grow is at a very, very high threshold. That's not a low marker. And obviously people that make it into therapy have maybe mentally or physiologically lowered that threshold significantly or convinced themselves that it's much lower as a patient. And I think half of our responsibility is to help them get over both that mental limitation as well as the physical limitation that more is possible. And you can get your body to do more, but you have to demand more from it. You cannot let it tell you what it's going to be. But if you haven't seen what people can do, if you haven't seen what the human body can do and how fast it can adapt or how strong it can be, then it's hard for you to coach to that level and push them to that level. I think that what's my favorite patient is the orthopedic surgeon. I've had several in my career, which is always a great compliment. They come in and say, "Don't I need you?" Because they're usually not a big therapy. Yeah. They're like, "I'm going to heal." Yeah. I can't tell you how many orthopedic surgeons we've seen and that have had fairly catastrophic injuries, like doing something, because they always do something, they're cycling or they're doing, some activity, running, or, not a lot of running stuff, but whatever that is they're doing.
Follow their bike.
Yeah, bike's a big one. I got 2 or 3 I can think about the bike right now that are pretty nasty, that would have limited some folks quite a bit. But they're like, no, I'm good. I'll be fine. They're like, yeah? They're like, that'll heal. Like, the confidence they have in the body's ability to heal is so insane. It's awesome. But they watch it. They watch it every day. If they see an MRI and then they go in, they do the surgery, they're like, oh, the ACL meniscus tear. Well, they go in to do the ACL, oh, the meniscus is already healed. Look at that. Cool, I'll just fix the ACL radiator. Like they watch an MRI, like pre-MRI, and maybe 6 weeks later another MRI to see a progress, to see a change. Like, they watch the body heal all day long in like a real live environment with real subjects. And the confidence they have in the human body is actually profound. It's amazing. And they do amazingly well because of that confidence.
Yeah.
So they have those two things. They know they can push it.
Yep.
And they have this unbelievable knowledge of the healing process, when to respect it and when to push it. And I think a lot of these, protocols or recommendations that are given are given to be extremely safe. We have another gentleman right now was held. I think it was like, I saw him for a shoulder last year. And he called me at like 6 or 8 weeks into it. He broke his ankle, fibula, and he had no RAF of the fibula. They did a tight rope as well, and the doctor kept him non-weight bearing for 6 weeks on crutches, obviously. And then he put him in a boot and said, you still can't weight bear from it was 9 weeks before I let him start to walk.
Wow.
And I was like, dude,
Jeez.
that's insane. Like,
So check out this. I've got a pro athlete. He's top 5 in the world at his sport, and he's going to get a resurfacing done of his hip, which is a fairly unique surgery. There's only a few in the nation that do it, and it's basically like a very, very small, shortened version of a replacement. And because this doctor is so special, you go on this doctor's Instagram, and he's got all his pro athletes that he's treated, and they all put their timelines out there. And the timelines will blow you away. Week 4, plyometrics. And so we were going through the Instagram today of all the athletes. They're like, this is week 5, swinging a golf club. This is week 6, fielding and hitting a live ball. Imagine that. To say 6 weeks after a resurfacing, you're going to have fake body part in your hip. And 6 weeks later, you could be hitting a fastball. And you basically, if you're listening, you just take all the protocols out there, you crumple them up, and you just throw them out the window with that timeline. And then you ask, well, what problem are we solving to? And so then the only way I can make sense of that is, well, it's a small cut to the capsule. They do some replacements. They don't injure any muscles or tendons in the way because they're a ninja at what they do. And if we can keep muscle and tendon function high, day 1, right after surgery, let's make sure the muscle tendons work. As soon as that capsule can probably even, in closed chain, as long as you're not opening up the capsule in that position, right? We give it 6 weeks and we can probably start prying that. I bet you can move fast as long as you don't pry open that capsule. And again, what's the question solved? So when we look at the protocols, they're very safe, very general, and they don't speak to the person. So let's go. I think the same thought. I know it's a very philosophical talk so far, but if you don't understand these narratives or these stories, you will always be you'll be a very simple PT operating in protocol land, and you're pretty much like no better than what they get off the internet. But if you really look at the person and try and take it all in, find out what tissue was disrupted, what problem do we need to solve to, what's our timeline, how fast can we do it, and how fast means how healthy is the person in front of me, and what's their growth potential at. And we're special to the world. We're of value to the world, different than what they could just find online.
Yeah, I think that's the take-home message, is really to look at the person, look at the athlete, look at the client in front of you, and ask that why question. Why? What are we going to do first, and then why is that important to you? And then how are we going to get there? And if we're constantly trying to solve that problem, if we're being curious, if we're thinking, what works for this person? What can they do? What can they do on their own? What are they going to commit to? Maybe using a barbell is a tool that is not going to be an advantage for them. Or maybe it's a situation where that's all they've got is the barbell, and you have to integrate it in that way. Which either way is fine, right? But we have to recognize what are the tools that we have, what are we trying to get to, and then put this in together. I think that's our job as a high performance clinician and high performance therapist in sports medicine is how do you integrate these things and put together an appropriate plan far beyond the protocol. And protocol is based on year and time frames, which is critical for you to understand and know. And then know when you can push, how to push, and what the end result should look like, and how long that journey is, which is usually quite a process.
Yeah, because I think, going back to the Instagram posts of all these unique exercises, which should be an every unique and fun exercise. I got one where, I'm not sure if I already said this, but the guy was doing like a dynamic lunge zercher squat, basically combining a zercher in a transverse plane into a lunge. It was really unique and interesting. And I'm sure it got a lot of likes because no one's ever seen someone do a zercher with 225 on a one-legged position. It's like a one-legged zercher with like a kickstand support. B stance, kickstand, one leg up and just winking, whatever. And I'm not sure what I was getting to, but what problem is he solving to? And I think the more unique exercises that I've come across in the last few years, and I like them, is because to me they solve a particular problem. I've often looked for a dynamic motion for the shoulder because I hate prone swimmers. I don't like doing them. And if I don't like doing them, then I'm probably not that likely to give it to people. But I think they're good exercise. I just don't like them. They're not interesting to me. So I've done more of these like teacup exercises because I like it. It's fun. It's fluid. It challenges. I challenge them by holding a teacup, and they call it teacups. And I'm solving the problem of, can you control full rotation? Period. It's like, what does that do? That's it. And I can put a 2-pound stimulus or a little slider. I was giving it to one of our strength coaches, like, hey, can you do this with 10 pounds? Can you do a 5-pound plate and another 5-pound plate? So if you dropped it overhead, it'd land on your head. Just cuts.
Tickets to watch Russ go on sale now. If you just message us directly, just go ahead and DM us, and we'll get you right in. It's a treat to watch. No, you're right on. Like my dad taught me this the other day. It was crazy. Like, so he's got this the shoulder thing that, we give him the traditional cuff stuff and built it up, and he's got a little shoulder neck thing going on that's cleared up. I asked him about it the other day. He's like, I'm like, and how's your shoulder been? Because he's family. He does actually listen to me at times. And he's somewhat committed, but he's not an exercise guy. Like, my dad's never been in a gym and would never go into it. We grew up on a farm. He's a mechanical engineer. So he's very science-based, engineering, physics, like, if it doesn't make sense, we ain't doing it, right? That whole measure twice, cut once, then it's more like measure probably 50 times, and then maybe we'll cut it. But we probably should measure 50 more. It's insane. It's so painful. But nonetheless, so we got it going, and he was doing well. So I hadn't seen him in like a few months. He hadn't brought it up, and I'm like, hey, how's your shoulder? He's like, it's great. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? He's like, I'm like, are you doing anything for it? He goes, yeah. He goes, how many had me do those little weights and stuff? He goes, so I found a rock that weighs probably like 2 pounds, about the same weight as we'd be using. And he goes, I just carry it over my head, and then I just kind of do like big circles with it for like a few minutes at a time, and I just move it around, and haven't had a problem in months.
I love it.
I'm like, where's Russ?
That's so awesome. Well, it's like I have pain lifting up a jug of milk out of the fridge. Well, that jug of milk is 8 pounds. We're gonna do 2 pounds. Where's they do that? I mean, like, we think of like therapy, but it doesn't have to be that smart. In fact, I think almost like the dumbest therapy is like, I don't want to get off track, but I think, if you could, that'd be a fun challenge, is no matter what your patient is, can you fix them with one thing? That would be just a fun challenge. You'll get one movement, you'll get to do one.
Yeah.
Can you change your pain pattern and change your injury with one? Because if you could do it with one, you really know the problem. How about that? Because when I was younger, I gave like 15 exercises, and I tried to tell them. I'm really honest with patients, and when I was like 27, I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to give you 15 exercises, and I promise you, one or two is going to work. I just don't know which ones.
I think I could do it with one in most cases if I could progress it. Like maybe we did.
For 30 seconds.
Yeah, or change the angle, change the weight, change the, somehow change the load, the amplitude, I think that would be reasonable.
Then you understand it, right?
Like, for example, like if it was a shoulder, like I'd say, okay, one exercise, I'd say, can I do like a one arm plank hold in the sagittal plane? And then can I move to the frontal plane once that's established? And then can I move it to more of like a handstand situation or like a thoracic bridge? And if I can move it into these different positions and have them master.
It's the same exercise, you're just progressing, you're making it harder and harder and harder.
Exactly, and then maybe somehow it becomes some sort of there's a plyometric component at the end, or a little top type movement, or a shoulder tap or something to kind of get on and off to get some twitch. Yeah, I think that's. Otherwise, it couldn't go through the continuum. I feel like they'd just be stuck in one phase. But to your point, yes, it would. Yeah. This is the kind of challenges you create.
What's interesting. It's going back to the post. This person I made that post. He injured himself with a high velocity movement in an awkward position. So clearly, you probably say he did not have stability in that position under speed. So that's the problem to solve.
So now there happens.
Yeah. Now what happens now he has compromised shoulder mobility. So we can't just let's get back to doing all this crazy shit over here real quick, because we do have a problem to solve first. So if maybe I just kind of said that in jest. I mean, there's probably a few problems to solve based on the continuum.
But you could have one exercise per item in the continuum.
There you go. Okay.
And I think that's unreasonable.
Well, I think it's how we communicate to people. If you can really kind of name, I think when you do that, you're actually dictating what equals success at this phase. You could say phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could say phase early motion, then advanced motion, or early stability, then advanced strength, and then speed power. However you want to name it. We just put these names in just to call it something. We could have called it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just when people say like, well, I'm at 3.5. Like, which one's that one? Like, well, I'm stable enough as judged by dynamometer and plank holds. I move enough as judged by passive motion and active motion control through, a standing position. But I'm not strong through a pattern that's either a push or a pull in some capacity because I weigh 200 pounds and I can only do this with a 30-pound object. Now we're clear as day. That's the problem to solve right now for this next block of time. And that's it. Our answer should be a very specific question. And then the why and the story and the communication is so easy that people will finally get it. And they'll say, oh, that makes sense. It's a rapture. Now I want every Instagram post, because I see it all the time, and you all see it too. They should be solving a problem. I think all cute exercises land in the motor control, personally.
Sure.
Because they're cute, because everyone's done every type of stability thing. How many different ways can you actually just like hold on to a position? So everything dynamic and pretty and visually pleasing is in the motor control category. And so that I do think it's kind of like dance. We keep watching dance and gymnastics and to some degree martial arts because we keep seeing new stuff because the body can continue moving different ways. So it's like a pot of gold in Instagram land. There's an infinite amount of motor control exercises. You can keep posting new shit. There's not an infinite amount of like strength exercises. To gain strength, it's kind of proven. We have some pretty big people on this planet. We know how to get strong. We know how to grow muscle and tendon. I don't think we're going to recreate that unless you want to start making new drugs. That's done well.
Yeah. Well, again, it goes back to choose the exercise and look who does that exercise, those movements best in the world, and if that's what you want to be, then that's great. So if you want to be a big, strong man and you want to do powerlifting, and you watch powerlifters lift, and you like how they look and how they move, and that's what you're trying to master, then do it. If you want to do Olympic lifting, and look at what the Olympic lifters look like. Is that the athlete that you're trying to create? They're usually not very large people. They're usually smaller because the angular velocities are better for them. They get under the bar more quickly, but they're very pound per pound. They're ridiculously strong. But is that the athlete we're trying to create? If we're a basketball player or a football player or a soccer player or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. So those are the questions that we have to continue to ask is, what people are mastering that in the world, and is that the progression we want to go down? If you're choosing, whatever the exercise is, doesn't matter what it is. To your point, if they're doing circus acts, then the person's in the circus, then
it works.
And yes,
It's completely applicable. Yeah. Going back, you mentioned a point where, CrossFit is a sport, Olympic lifting is a sport. And one unique thing about sport is they tend to be very hard. You need to spend a long time to get good because that's what we're measuring. We're measuring all these people who do it and see who's the best. And whoever's the best, we call the winner. And the second best is called the loser. And oftentimes losers get hurt because they're pushing their body so flippant hard. So I think what's not commonly understood is when you aim for sport, if it's a sport, people tend to get hurt because they're driving hard for performance. Where it's like, rotator cuff exercise is not a sport. This is, by definition, it's not really like designed to be like that high threat, and there's really no losers. But if we start using a lot of exercises that do have high threat, and we have to accept there will be losers, there will be injuries, there will be, we see that, and I was working with the middle linebacker of the 49ers. I started there for a few years. This is many years ago, someone can tell you who. And he's a big guy, strong guy. He was like 245, very fast, ballistic. And I asked him what kind of exercise he does to maintain fitness. And he mentioned a few exercises. And one thing he did not mention a power clean. He did not mention a deadlift. He did not mention an RDL. He didn't even really mention a front squat. And when I asked about that, he goes, "Oh, I'm big enough. Those exercises, they tend to hurt if I do them to the degree that I need. So I sprint stadium stairs and I sprint to kind of keep my size. I don't really need to do strength anymore. I did that in college. Once I kind of got big and strong, I didn't need to do it anymore because it's just too high threat and I tend to get hurt." Smart man. Oh, that's how you were in the league until you did mid-30s. That explains it.
Yes. and increasing the size for him may have hurt him more than helped him as far as for speed and agility and stuff goes. So, yeah, absolutely, that's super interesting. All right, if you guys have some questions for us, if you have some comments about the topic, throw it into the chat, message us about it. If you have any questions, I'd love to kind of answer them in the future on the KIMEcast. And then if you want to come see Russ Street in the clinic, hit us up with them. You can make that happen as well. Always be a good time. Thanks for listening.